Welcome to the Elokus podcast. This is class number 16 in the discourse Uvrashei Chodsheichem 5672, which is the ninth discourse in the overall book, B'Shasha Hegdimu 5672. And this is going to be class number 3 in chapter 36. And maybe, depending on how this goes, this is going to be the concluding class in this ninth discourse. So mazel tov on that. Let's see if that happens. So let's go. So the last thing we were learning was how he explained that the concept of the measuring of the lights into each sphere and into each world, is not only coming from the vessels, but it's actually the light itself is a measured light that has an intrinsic measuring element in it, because this is really it's not just this whole chapter is not just by the way that it's also measured because of the lights, not just because of the vessels. This is actually essential, very essential. This is actually very essential. Sorry. It's very essential to the general. Sorry, just one second. I'm going to put this on silent. It is the very, very essential to the general idea that we've been learning in the entire book, and that is that the Or Pnimi, that the internal light, is not the Or Ein Sof as the Or Ein Sof is for itself. It's from the very, very get-go already a light that is meant to be received in the worlds, even while it exists within the very, very Ein Sof itself, before the Tzimtzum. And that's the concept of Esa Spheres Agnuzais, that there's already a concept of Spheres. Although, as we discussed in the earlier, it's so not, but it's already meant to be. And therefore, eventually it turns into the Kav. And as we're learning over here, the Kav is a line, a thread of light, which, as we learned in the last class, emanates from above the circle, from above the black hole, into this black hole, but it goes from the top where it's touching the Ein Sof, and as it goes down towards the center of that circle, and it continues to bring about the evolution of all the levels of worlds. And while it's doing that, it is getting weaker and weaker in a sense. It's measuring out in each level a lesser light. That's what we were learning in last class. But you hear how now, if we would say that this is only connected to the kalim, only connected to the vessels, that would be consistent with the idea that there's no with the idea of the Ramak, Ramosha Cordova, who says there is no there's no spheros in the lights. The lights don't have any concept of spherot at all. The lights are purely pashut, utterly simple. And the whole concept of Esa Spheres Agnuzos is only kalim, only vessels. But the whole mimer that we're learning over here is that he's coming to explain the difference between the Or Pnimi and the Or Makav, that according to the Arizal, there is already a certain in the Or Ein Sof, like we discussed, if you remember, I'll take you back to a phrase that we only use, Or Ein Sof A and Or Ein Sof B. This is the second dimension of Or Ein Sof, which is the Or Ein Sof's potential to be mayor, to shine for the world. And therefore, it's carrying down. And now, as it arrives already in the world of manifestation in Kalim, we shouldn't attribute the measuring element only from the vessels, but we should realize that the measuring element is already related to the light itself. Okay. Now we're holding over here Ube Pardes. Now it's interesting. He's now going to bring a proof from the Pardes, which is Ramosha Cordova, which is the Cordovero, which is the Ramak. And he's going to show that even according to the Ramak, this is true, that there is some measured elements even in the lights. Because you remember, the Ramak who blames all the tzimtzum and all the definitions only on the vessels, he holds that even in Atzilus, according to his opinion, even in Atzilus, to really the lights are all just one simple light flowing through all the spheres. It's only that what? That the chesed element and the gevura element and all these definitions are only because that light is shining in a different vessel. It's like pure water that you're looking at, or a light shining through a green light, a red light, or a yellow light by a traffic light. The light is the same. It's just that the coloring is coming from the vessel. That's the Ramak's opinion. And that's consistent with this whole idea that the oiros are pashut. The Arizal is saying, no, oiros are mitziyarim. There's already a tzir in the lights. There's already a definition even in the lights, albeit as subtle that you can't even imagine. We can't even imagine how subtle. But yet, the concept exists already in the lights. So according to the Ramak, then we should say that this idea of measure, the light should be purely infinite. There shouldn't be even any measured element in the lights at all. But here he's going to show that no, even according to the Ramak himself says that when the lights come into Atzilus, into the vessels, there is already a measuring element in them, which means the measuring element cannot be blamed only on the guf, only on the body, which are the kalim, but it's also mitzad the neshama, also from the soul of the spheres. There's also a measure. It seems like it doesn't have yet a definition of chesed gevura. The lights are pashut, but a measured element, which means a certain how much light will shine in each sphere, that is due to the light. Let's see. He says, see, there's in the book of Pardes, he has an encyclopedia on Kabbalistic concepts. And in the letter Shin, in the section for the letter Shin, there is a piece where he discusses the concept of shiur kaima. In Talmud and in Midrashic sources, there is a phrase shiur kaima shal yotzei bereshis, which means the measured kaima can be, I guess, posture, or coma can be the measured, I don't know, I didn't think about it before I started the class. Coma can be the measured upright being. Like how tall is the Yotzei Bereshis, is the creator of creation, the one who created Bereshis. In other words, Hashem, as he becomes a source for creation, how big is he? So it says shiur kaima, and it gives a certain amount. We discussed it actually in one of the discourses earlier, that there's a certain shiur to this, right? So over there he explains that this is not just referring to Kalim, that the fact that we are referring to shiur means a measurement. That means even in the oir, since the light is going into the vessels of Atzilus, that's already called the supernal man, which means God, not as God is Ein Sof, but God as he's already emerging as a man, which means as a source for creation and as a life force of the spheroids. So over there he says, that the neshama, the soul, the lights, that becomes unified into the spheroids, nikra shiur, is called measured, mipnei shehi, because it's the neshama, hanoisenes shiur, gives a measure, gives a limit, l'chol ha'koima, to the entire structure. Vihi, and this power, ha'oimeres, is what says l'sphira, to every attribute, die enough. It's almost like maybe it's related to the name Shakai, which Chazal say means she, die, it is enough. It means it sets a measure how much light should be released in every sphere. But his diuk over here is what the Rebbe Rashab, what the Rebbe over here wants to bring forth is that this is not coming from the guf, it's not coming from the keli, from the vessel. It's even according to the Ramak, it's connected to the neshama. V'chein kasev b'shar atzmos v'kelim perek zayin, and so he also repeats it again in his portal of atzmos v'kelim. Atzmos then would be, I think, referring to the lights and the kelim and the vessels, chapter 7. Over there he says it as well. Olafima shekasav sham. However, according to what he says there, this does not negate everything we were saying about the Ramak, that the Ramak generally is of the opinion that the lights are very free and they're not colored and they're not they're not defined, as opposed to the Arizal, who already places somewhat of a limitation on the lights, on the Or Pnimi. So he says, but according to what he says over there, which means like this, that this measuring element that's taking place in the lights is not so much because the lights are measured. The light according to the Ramak, according to Ramosha Kedavar, light is a reflection of the light is always me'ein hamor. It's an illumination of the luminary. So if the luminary is simple, with utter simplicity, the light is also infinite. If so, why are the lights then having this, some kind of self-control? So he says it's not self-control. It's not the lights. The lights as they are for themselves are really free and infinite and so forth. But the emanator, which is God's very essence, the very being himself, and where all light is coming from, he has a will, and that will, since he wants these lights to be controlled in the vessels, so he kind of casts a spell on the lights and forces the lights to be within limitation. So according to that would mean it's a superimposed will from something that's above the lights. According to the Arizal, it's related to the lights itself. The light is not it's not Or Ein Sof A, it's Or Ein Sof B. It's the Or HaKav that eventually evolves into the light of the Kav. Kav means, according to what we said earlier, it's a line, Kav Umida, it's a measuring, it's measured. So it's intrinsic to the light itself that it's measured, as he explained earlier, that as the further the light goes, the weaker it gets diminished. So there is already, it's not pure Ein Sof in the full sense of the word, that as far as it will go, it's always the exact same Ein Sof. That is according to Ramak. But even according to the Ramak, it's not totally Ein Sof the farther it goes, but not because the light doesn't have this Ein Sofness to it, but rather because the emanator to lessen. And that's a very big difference. That's what he's saying over here. And this is in the parentheses. This is the will of the emanator. In the inyan of spheres. But, however, he says, but according to what it says in Eitz Chaim, is that no, this is not a superimposed external element that is reigning in the light, but rather from the very get-go, the will, when Hashem wills the light to go out, he wills the light in such a fashion that the light itself should be limited. It was already measured. The light itself is a measured light because the will that's generating this light to go out is willing the light in a manner of limitation. In the manner in which the kav moves out of the source, that it should be in a way that it should have a close part, which are the closer parts of the kav, that it's closer to the circle, and the more distant shabai. The nimtza comes out the hamadida, the ma'ilomata, that the measuring element of up and down, hu b'ha'or, is in the light itself. In which manner it should be reveal itself in the spheres, in chachma with a bang, in bina with much less intensity, and so it makes its way down, and the ze'er anpin even less, and finally into malchus, in kingship, even much less. Harei comes out shebe'esa spheres, but all of this is what brings us to the conclusion that the real hischalkos and definitions, in other words, where do you see in other words, really in the Esespheres Agnuzais, there is already a potential for 10, but it's not, and a hierarchy and a lower and a higher and all that, but it's not in any way detected, it's not in any way seen, it's not in any way expressed. It takes a long time to these essential elements that is in the very, very light itself to actually show itself. And where does it show itself? With an up and a down and a higher and a lower, is when it makes its way into the world of Atzilus, and it makes its way into Spherois. And over there you find a whole lineup of those of Chachma that's standing the first on the line, and Bina that's the second, and there is a higher and a lower. There's an up and a down. And that applies both to the lights, and also in the vessels. And as we explained earlier, the more the light, the fewer the vessel. And then as the vessels thicken and get more pronounced, the lights get, there's a very perfect interplay between the lights and the vessels. However you want to look at it, he says, if you're going to remember, we were learning two ways of explaining this. What is the real source of the measurement? If the measuring element is in the light, and the light calls and produces a vessel that fits the measured release of the light. The light itself wants to release itself in a certain way, and therefore it calls for a vessel that can match it. Or as we learned, another possible way that there is, which he initially explained earlier, is that since there's a thicker vessel appears, so the light has to adjust itself to the vessel. And both are true, like we discussed earlier. Or that the measurement is in the vessel. And in the manner of how the vessel is calling for the light, will draw the light. Because in truth, they're both true. When we watch the evolution of things, like when things are actually manifesting from up down, there's no vessels at all. The light has to produce the vessel. So the light is first, and the light decides of how much wattage it wants to release, and based on that, it brings about a bulb that will fit it. In the beginning of the revelation, the measurement happens in the light. In which way, in which manner it should shine. And it should reveal itself. And in accordance to that level, he has havas hakelim, is what then brings about the vessels to match it. But then afterwards, once the kelim are in place, so what happens over here is like this. If the vessel decides to go to the gym and work on itself and do every single day push-ups and every single day, break its limitations and its boundaries by surrendering itself more and more, then a coarser vessel will become more refined. Then it will draw down more light into its vessel. Like we said, even physically in the body, you have a certain amount of power in your body coming from your soul. But if you work diligently every day and you exercise, you create a stronger vessel. And that comes usually by what? By breaking the body, by breaking the laziness of it and its stubbornness and its thickness and its density that it just doesn't want to do anything. And you work it, then you get simply stronger. Strength means that the soul, more deeper power of the soul can go into the body. So the same as with the kelim, same as spiritually as well. The more we refine for instance, the more we study, the more we break and it says actually when a person it does mental exercise with his mind, it actually thins, it causes, the Lashon, it says in different Maamorim, there are dents in the mind, literally. From someone who uses their brain, you can see creases in the brain, which make the vessel less, in a sense, which means make it less keli, and therefore more light can shine there. So it's the same, according to the refinement of the vessels. And think about that. We refine the vessels for thousands of years, and then the vessels that we've refined, whether it's our own bodies, whether it's the general time and space that we're refining through all our collective efforts, we make that even the world of Asiya, which is the thickest vessels, will in the days of Mashiach have the same capacity like the world of Atzilus, and even higher. We draw the light. The kolza and all of this ain't a shayach. However, all of this ain't a shayach rak ba'oris pnimim. This whole idea of higher and lower, and here it shines more and here it shines less, is when there is an internal light, which means a light that is meant to integrate with the vessel. And then you're going to have this whole system of higher and lower, because a vessel that's cleaner, whether it was initially from God above produced as a cleaner vessel, or whether we worked it out, whether a person worked on their vessels, or some zichuchim that happened, whatever it is, then you can receive more light. However we're going to interpret it, there is a interplay and a compatibility between light and vessel, because from the light was meant to be received and integrated in a vessel. All this is only possible in internal lights, which are meant to become enclosed in a vessel. They are, and these lights are already intrinsically measured. They have this ischalkus, they have this division of up and down, and therefore from there can come these from here we will have this whole system of up and down. Okay. With this, technically, we concluded the discourse, but now he's going to bring it back to the opening verse that he started, as we always mention that in every parsha, and this is the 9th time we're doing it. He connects it, he rounds back to the question he asked in the beginning of the Maamor. This was quite a while ago, because we had about a month and about 5-6 weeks that I wasn't teaching, and we had started the Maamor a long time ago. So let's swing back to the first page and let's go back to the question. This Maamor began with a pasuk in Parshas Pinchas that says, it talks about the special musaf sacrifices or offerings that were brought on the special holidays. They brought an additional sacrifice called the Karban Musaf. And it says over there, the first one the Torah mentions Shabbos, and then it mentions Uvrashei Chodsheichem. And on the first of your months, simply it means since we have 12 months, so it means Uvrashei Chodsheichem on any one of the Rosh Chodeshes, whether it's Rosh Chodesh Tishrei, which is Rosh Hashanah, whether it's Rosh Chodesh Cheshvan or whatever, or Nisan, Iyar, every single one of these months, you should add these sacrifices: 1 ox, 1 ram, and 7 sheep. Okay, on the temple. But the Zohar makes an interesting comment that it says rush. If the plural, it should have said uvera. No, the Zohar says Uvrashei can also be learned, and in the heads of your chodesh. Heads. That means that the chodesh has more than one head. So the Zohar asks, isn't the head of the chodesh the sun? And doesn't the sun only have therefore only one head? Because it's the sun. It's just like a person has one head. So the sun only has one head, and that's the head of the chodesh. And the Zohar answers, no, it's got 2 heads, and that is Yaakov and Yosef. Yaakov and Yosef are the 2 heads of the chodesh. As the Zohar says, Kamer Rosh and Inan L'Sihara. How many heads are there to the moon? So the first thing we know is that chodesh is the moon, because what decides a new month? Not in the Gregorian calendar. What do you call it? Whatever. But in the Jewish calendar, which is a lunar calendar, we follow the moon, and the new month is always when there's a new moon. So that's the moon, and we know that the moon is referring to Malchus, and Malchus is the wife, the woman, and she receives from her husband, and he's called her head. Who's her husband? There's an Eranpin that's called the sun. It's just like physically, how do we have a new moon? Is because the moon is reflecting the light of the sun, and that's bouncing off to the earth, and that is the new moon. So there's only one. So the Zohar says no, that when the sun and moon get married, because that's what Rosh Chodesh is, a new light shining from the sun to the moon, there's 2 dimensions of it. It can be the marriage of Yaakov and the moon. The moon is Rachel, Malchus is Rachel. We know that Yaakov had a wife, Rachel. It can be the marriage of Yaakov with Rachel, or it can be facilitated through Rachel's son Yosef, and that makes the marriage of Yaakov to Rachel deeper, because it's not going to be Yaakov marrying Rachel. That means it's not going to be the external level of the sun shining to the moon. It's going to be the deeper, more essence of the sun shining to the moon, and that would mean it's going to be the marriage of Yisroel to Rachel. We know that Yaakov had a name change, and God initially was called Yaakov, and then when he went through all his trials and tribulations, he had a name upgrade, and his new name was Yisroel. And we know that these are two dimensions within the Ze'er Anpin. There's the external dimension of the Ze'er Anpin, which naturally flows to Malchus, which happens every Rosh Chodesh on a new level, but on a much deeper level, we draw down a total new light, and that's from Israel, higher than Yaakov. But that, in order for that to happen, Yosef has to be involved, because Yosef is Yesod, and even though Yesod is lower than Yaakov, Yaakov is Yosef's father, but Yesod, we know, pulls from a very deep place within the person. Let me explain that for a moment. Yesod is the reproductive organ in a person. And a person can have a relationship with his wife by talking to her and having nice dinner, a nice romantic conversation. He might even kiss her and therefore give from himself to her. But his deepest transmission he can give to her is if he's being intimate. And then he's taking of his essence and transmitting it to her. So that's the Yosef. So what we're saying is like this: when the Hakadosh Baruch Hu, which is referring to the sun, which is the Ze'er Anpin, shining to Rachel, which is the moon, if he's doing it through Yaakov, which is Tiferes, it's more external. If it's the relationship coming through Yosef, which is so deep, that's when it's essence, and that's the higher. That's why it says Uvrashei Chodsheichem, the two heads of the moon, Yaakov and Yosef. And over here, Yosef is higher than Yaakov, and he's going to explain every Rosh Chodesh. Through our prayer, when we daven Shachris and we say Hallel, it's very good. We pull the light from Yaakov to shine to Rachel. We pull the light of the sun to shine to the moon, but from the external. Then when we daven Musaf means an addition. And the Zohar says that Musaf corresponds to Yosef. That the prayer of Musaf, because Musaf means an addition. And over here, the addition is a bonus. And what kind of an addition is it? It's an infinite addition. It's much more and much deeper than than a more external revelation from the Ze'er Anpin to Rachel. How does this all fit into what we were learning earlier? Very, very simple. It's the whole concept of being a yichud, where one sphera delivers to another sphera a higher light, is only possible in an or pnimi, in an internal light. Because above the internal lights, even though there's 10 spheres, they're all the same. They're all still infinite. Where do they manifest? And things become very controlled. And therefore there is a much higher revelations in the highest spheres. And then as they go down lower, they become less and less, as we discussed in this whole Maamor, that from Chachma to Malchus is an enormous amount of limiting and downgrading. But yet, even though the lights are downgraded, from time to time, there are yechudim, where one sphera transmits to the highest sphera a much higher light. And that's the idea of the yechud. And in this itself, there are two levels. There is the external unification and the one of Yosef, which is the highest and deepest, because that reveals the deeper husband to Rachel. Yaakov is not revealing to her his superficial self, but his much, much deeper inner higher self. Let's read that inside quickly. A little bit we'll start, and then we'll finish that in the next class. I thought we'll finish the class, but it has to be 17 classes, because 17 is the level of Yosef. So let's do that. Apian al Reuven, and based on this, and I have a special intention why I want to finish this today. So there's going to be a double class today. This is going to be class number 1, and this is going to be followed up immediately by class number 2. Apian al, and based on that, Reuven Mashakasa will understand what it says. Uvrashei Chodsheichem. And in the heads of your months, the Zohar says, how many heads how many heads are there? There's only one head. There's no head to the moon. Only the sun. The heads are 2, Yaakov and Yosef. Now, one head to the moon is Yaakov. The Zohar says the second head to the moon is Yosef. But hold it, Yosef is not the wife of Rachel. Yosef is the son of Rachel. So he's going to explain. The Inyan, in order for Yosef to come into existence, Yaakov in a sense had to transmit from Yisroel, even though he wasn't called yet Yisroel. So that could be that's the meaning. The Inyan, it says in the Sefer Maayor, which is one of the students of the Arizal, the Tfilas Musaf, that the Tfilah of Musaf, hu b'chinas Yisoid, we're activating Yesod. Remember, we said Yesod is the sixth sphera, which is the element of foundation, which is really the idea of reproduction, the sexual element of the human being, the males, and that's Yesod. Shabbat b'Sod Tosefes. That's why it's called the Musaf, because there's the regular flow of energy from God to the world. And just like in every relationship, a husband provides to his wife, but his regular providing for his wife is he gives her, takes care of the bills, provides her with food, with clothing, whatever she needs. But then there is an intimacy. And when an intimacy means he's giving he's not giving an external revelation of them, he's giving his entire being to her. It's a greater bonus. And this is the idea of Yichud Yisroel V'rachel. This is when through Yosef, Yaakov is not revealing his Yaakov element, but and even in the word Yaakov comes from the word Akev, the heel, is more external. Heel, like in a human being, the heel is the lowest part of the person. In the word Israel is the word Rosh, head. It's the head of Jacob. It's his entire being. Yeah. This is the difference between Shachris and Musaf. This is the difference between the prayer of morning services to Musaf to the afternoon service, to the Musaf prayer. The Tefillah Shachris, the Shachris prayer, Hu Yichud Yaakov V'rachel, is the unity that creates in heaven a unity between Jacob and Rachel, between Yaakov and Rachel. The Tefillah Musaf, but the prayer of Musaf, Hu Yichud Yisroel V'rachel, is the unity of Israel, a much higher level, Rachel and Rachel. And he's going to explain how that is much higher when it is the idea of this unity being on a level of coming through Yosef, how much deeper and how many infuses into them. And in a month, miracles, and it infuses a light much higher than the world, an infinite light into creation. We're going to leave this for the next class, Be'ezus Hashem, and conclude.